Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and today we're joined with Khaprice, member of Ushra'Khan, faction warfare veteran, and a man I've drunk with in at least 3 countries around the world, which is testament enough to his dedication to EVE Online and the power of his liver. So, first of all, the most important question, how was your day, Khaprice?
Kaplach! Today has been a fine day. We retook Dal and we just defended our Poco in Flossuswin.
That's brilliant, I'm sure it's all down in Minmatar space.
Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of the war zone and things, as of today, I think there's only 2 of the mission hub systems left in Amar control. So, yeah.
Did you actually get any fights? I'm curious.
Fights occur generally with the pirates and people. So the likes of Baltram, Zlot, and Ditty say jump. But in terms of the Amar, we are having some fights with war targets at the moment. There's 2 sort of main groups. One of whom sort of live next to Flossuswin, so we have the occasional tussle with them. They've put some capitals on gates and things. Silliness. But in terms of actual Plex warfare, so the actual sort of faction warfare fighting, currently our only real opponents are Siege Gold, who are a Korean group. So they've got some fresh blood in there, and yeah, while they're full of enthusiasm, they maybe aren't the most skilled people, so it sort of depends who's FCing them.
Right, so from my perspective, there's been a lot of developments and mostly lore developments that have been kicking off in the Warzone lately. And everything's been a little overshadowed by the focus that's been put on the Triglavian Menace, who are of course running all over HiSec and making big scope videos. And the last that I really heard was, whilst I was discussing with Ashtarothi, he mentioned some saber rattling from Khaprice and restructuring of the military under Sarum. Can you fill us in a little bit about why that was important and what's happened since?
Certainly. I mean, the other thing that's going on at the moment in terms of the overriding sort of roleplay arcs is the Galentean elections, which are obviously having quite a bit of space in the news articles as well. But in terms of the the
Oh,
restructuring,
before we go on, isn't Julianus another player in the running for that or something?
yeah, Julianus is actually in the running to become potentially the prime minister. I mean, we've already had Jacobs Roden, who is a capsuleer, be their president, prime minister for some time. So you never know. Could be interesting. Somehow I doubt we'll see players becoming faction leaders, but it's Eve. You never know.
Anyway, carry on before I interrupted you.
That's all right. In terms of the restructuring of the Amar military, I mean, Ushra'Khan don't really pay too much attention to that sort of thing. So I was aware of it happening, and like some of my friends like Matari, when they sort of did away with some of the way they used to do things in the Amar military. They've now doled out the various provinces around the cluster. So you've got House Sarum are now in charge of the upper rebel provinces, and House Adi Shapur are in charge of the lower rebel provinces, i.e. Minmatar space. I mean, in terms of how that sort of interacted with us, as I say, Ushra'Khan like to roleplay with their guns, as our glorious Chief Harkon puts it. So they weren't particularly aware of that. What was sort of happening around the end of September, start of October this year was losing some more groups from the war zone in terms of the actual faction warfare community there. Starting to lose more and more players because nothing was really happening and nothing had been happening for quite a long time. Which is where we come around to the sort of the treaty that some of the traitor Amar and ourselves and Ushra'Khan signed, mainly with regards to mission running in the war zone.
And this is actually something that I ended up covering in one of my news videos, because this was also almost a completely out of character event from my perspective, as what happened were a bunch of leaders from the war zone, like you said, came together and they agreed on attempting to basically shut down certain areas of the war zone from fighting in order to lock out people from using these agents, which were very profitable ways of getting PvE money from the faction warfare zone without having to engage in PvP. And from what I understand, they felt that that was kind of defeating the purpose of faction warfare, and they wanted to do everything they could to push that out and see what the Warzone would be like without it.
Absolutely. I mean, we had some fantastic art done by one of our PR guys, and the language being used on the treaty itself, like the document that we put out on the Reddit thread, is talking in game terms. It's talking about PvE, PvP. It's not a sort of an in-character thing. It's just very nice. But it wasn't a roleplay thing. It wasn't something where we had considered maybe the ramifications you could transpose onto it in roleplay terms. And indeed, we didn't do anything roleplay with it initially. It took Arcia Etkin posting on the Intergalactic Summit an article where they said they were breaking the deafening silence on this treaty, right? Which, yeah, I can see that, but that was maybe a deliberate thing on our part. It wasn't really a roleplay thing, you know. This is a faction warfare is in dire straits, and the sort of the main push of it was to draw attention to faction warfare and our sort of plight in terms of some small things have been sort of looked at by CCP recently, but it's been clear that faction warfare needs something bigger for a long time.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the systems were outdated, not taking things like citadels into account. And whilst,
very definitely.
Yeah, we did get a couple of changes towards that though, which is very nice to see. Like that's one of the benefits of Team Talos, is they can just throw in little quick things like that. I'm gonna keep sucking Team Talos's dick and just hope that they survive until next year. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not what we're sort of looking for in terms of what we want is something that changes the mechanics here, right? Where you'd have a sort of rolling front line, say, from sort of planet side, and the way they do things, so that you could only take systems next to systems you own, and then you'd have a more, a more geographic war zone than how it sort of works at the moment. But in terms of the treaty, again, yeah, the whole idea was we exchange mission systems, mission hub systems. So the level 4 agents that are the ones the PvEers, the mission farmers go after, because it's where they make their money. And for a long time now, faction warfare in the roleplay community especially has been referred to as the Pendulum Wars, because it's this thing where, depending on the LP prices, the farmers will come and go, push the systems sort of naturally, and it goes back and forth and nothing really happens. I mean, back when you had medals that hadn't been earned yet, there was still a big impetus. So when I joined Faction Warfare back in 2015, we were trying to get our medal, the last medal to be got by one of the 4 factions. So when you take all of the systems for the first time, you get a medal. Everyone in your faction gets a medal, which was a glorious headache for CCP to actually work out who should be getting the medal, but that's by the by. And we were on the defensive a lot. It seemed very much like there were a lot more Amar faction warfare players at that time. And when there were no more medals to get, it seemed like that was a real sort of full stop for faction warfare. I mean, Dirt and Glitter's old battle cry was #NoMedal. So that was sort of their rallying cry. Once they couldn't say that anymore, something sort of died, and they left. They went up to nullsec. They came back, and they've been involved in the treaty. But it sort of wasn't the same after that in our war zone.
There wasn't the same kind of narrative to really drive the conflict.
Absolutely. Everyone has got their medal, and everyone has owned all the systems at various points over the last 10 years. And as far as sort of role players go, well, this isn't doing anything. This isn't having effect, right? There's no point in wasting our lives, our crew's lives, in doing this anymore.
Yeah. So that ended up with like a player post on the IGS, which is it's an in-character section of the forum posting. It's basically what the EVE forums would be if EVE was real.
Indeed. On the Galnet, as they refer to such things. And in terms of that treaty, it is a funny one, because you've got 5 five signatories or five groups with signatories on the Amar side, and a little more outweighed on the other side. You've just got Ushra'Khan. Myself, Khaprice, and Harkon, our chief in Ushra'Khan, both signed it. And Smile and Wave, who are a big Russian alliance, one of the only other big permanent groups in Minotaur faction warfare. Their leader White Drop was, sort of saying, yeah, no, he'd look at signing it, but their membership didn't want to. They're not too hard on the roleplay, and they were like, no, what are you doing? But the treaty itself was the 1st of October. So we put our announcement out 1st of October. Okay, we're signing this treaty. And the treaty had the idea of this thing as something to do to protest and shut down mission running for a period of time. Had been floating around for a while. They had proposed this before, like Templar Dane and Flying Hot Pockets and people. It was something that had been proposed before, and we'd sort of gone, no. At this point, yeah, okay, something was very wrong, and there was very little fighting going on. So it's like, okay, we do this, fine. It's time to actually take a stand. And then we sort of go about starting to take all the systems and exchange them. Sort of 3 weeks pass, and we're getting towards taking all the systems. And then on the 21st of October is when the World News article comes out with House Sarum orders mobilization and reclaiming in reaction to alleged militia corruption. which obviously blew my mind in terms of, right, myself and my leader Harkon, we have signed a treaty, and now they are going to enslave an entire planet.
Sucks to be you. You just enslaved people.
But this is the thing, like, in character, yeah, this has affected my character Khaprice in a big way, as it would. This sort of thing is a little crazy, and it's the sort of thing that does not happen in other games, really. Like you're playing a perfectly good MMO. You're playing with your friends. You may be doing dungeons, doing all sorts of activities. But in terms of affecting the lore of that game and the way it's progressing, not so much a thing that happens.
Yeah, in WoW there is a generic term to refer to whatever adventurer randomly killed this big baddie if a lore character didn't do it. They're just referred to as a band of adventurers. Whereas in, EVE Online, you get to hear characters like, Khaprice call out CVA as one of the Amar's allies, as well as, people like Pi and all the assorted.
Indeed, and that sort of thing means a lot to players, regardless of whether they're, fully immersed in the lore or consider themselves role players or not. That the fact that there's this sort of give and take, it means a lot to the world and the way it feels to live in EVE. I mean, the live events were something that kept me playing the game after my friends stopped. Like the Sancha incursions, the live event arc was sort of coming to a close when I started getting involved in that. But just seeing that was incredible. And then you had things like the capital hunt against Templis Calcif, the Kaldari terrorists.
Yeah, the incursion live events were very specifically something that was very important to me continuing to play the game for, I think, as long as I did. And that's why, I'm a Sancha role player when I actually bother to actually roleplay, which is not very often these days.
And the Sancha roleplay is a curious one, as it's evolved alongside the incursion plotline. Again, in terms of you having a group that are role-playing something a certain way, and then CCP maybe takes some other parts of that faction in a different way.
No, yeah, but then it leads to very interesting scenarios where people who thought they were being loyalists turn out, they're actually just completely wrong about the cause. And that's really cool, because you don't get that in other games at the end of the day. Like you're saying, it is a very unique experience to try and do something in a world that feels like it is reacting to your actions. We have Caroline Star, which, let's remember, is named Caroline Star because a player called Caroline discovered it.
Indeed, Caroline Grace, very much deserving of that accolade. They were doing a lot of fun roleplay around that time.
Anyway, let's keep going. Let's get off of this tangent.
Yeah. So back to the treaty. So we're taking systems. So the 15th of October, I believe, we take Starkman, Arzad to the Yamar. So we have a bit of a little role play with ourselves, which has been a point of contention in the Warzone for a long time. Arzad's been a staging ground for a lot of the bigger Mar groups, and for ourselves because of some of the roleplay around the Starkmanir tribe. We sort of get involved there a little more than we would otherwise. I think Alna on the 27th of October was the last Warzone system in the treaty to flip over. I could be wrong. I think that was the last one. So by the beginning of November, we've taken all of the treaty systems. One of the interesting things in terms of back to the lore and the role play and the world news articles that were coming out fairly regularly and were mentioning stuff going on in terms of, yes, the Amara are invading. They've put boots on the ground, got different factions and mercenary groups getting involved. They also mentioned in the world news, though, that Minmatar Sakal clan forces raid HZO refinery mineral extraction and processing facility on Huola 6. Now, Huola, again, was a big capital system for the Amara militia for a very long time. And we had owned it for quite some time at this point ourselves, because Smile and Wave, the Russian group I mentioned, they lived there. So we'd owned that for ages. And there was sort of this idea floating around that maybe there'd be reparations. So yeah, you guys are invading in Flossaswin. Well, we've got this system in Huola. Maybe there'll be some bad stuff happening on Huola. And while we didn't do much in the terms of staging there or doing stuff in space, but CCP seemed to run with this, and a little later we then had accusations of deathglow attacks in Huola that were being sort of attributed to Ushra'Khan and the Bloody Hands of Matar, sort of Minmatar terrorist group associated with Ushra'Khan, but it wasn't us. It actually wasn't us. Like, the way terrorism works, we would be taking credit for that if that's what we meant it as, and we didn't do it. So you've got the situation where the Amara actually sort of, or the Blood Raiders perpetrating atrocities on their own soil and sort of blaming us.
That's certainly an interesting lore event. I don't think we've had a lot of black flags over the years. Sorry, false flags over the years, not black flags.
Yeah.
Everything up and including the Nick's station docking incident.
Yeah.
But what was that for then, do you think? Why were the Blood Raiders trying to paint the Minmatar in such a bad light? Or at least the Minmatar militia?
Well, I mean, the Amar themselves sort of putting a political spin on this and sort of trying to go, okay, whatever we're doing, they're doing worse. And there's been a lot of these deathglow attacks happening in interesting places politically, and again interacting with characters. So some characters' families have been targeted. Characters in terms of player characters have been targeted in the Deathglow attacks with the Blood Raider sort of arc that's been happening. And obviously with the Deathglow as a thing that's involved with VTOC and the VTOxin, sort of Amar slave control drug. But anyway, that's a little to one side. In terms of the treaty, so what we then get for most of November is it's fairly stable. Like, not a lot happened. There's some more interesting stuff going on in the sort of the roleplay and the lore. So you have sort of mercenary groups coming into Flossaswin, and some sort of comments going on in the world news. But we managed to keep the treaty pretty much pat for the month of November, which was fairly, we were certainly having to fight some of these groups I mentioned for control of some of the systems. So, for instance, you've got Sasala next to Camella, which is one of our home systems, where the Siege Gold are based, and so we were sort of having to fight them and trying to keep everywhere stable and do this sort of juggling act. I will say in terms of the traitor Amar, who we had the treaty with, so like Team America, Dirt and Glitter, Yondu, 44th Recon, they did a lot of work. A lot of the heavy lifting at the start of this was them, and this was sort of their thing initially. Like, this was something they'd mentioned, and it was sort of their baby. And we sort of went, okay, well, we'll do this. But they actually made Minmatar alts to run the Minmatar systems as well as the Amar systems, to do the exchange initially and get the things pushed and get the things stable. And they did a lot of them did burn themselves out doing it as well. So you have a situation now where we're still here, Ushra'Khan's very much still kicking, and very much to them getting involved with the diamond fleets that CCP have been putting out in the war zone. But in terms of, say, flying hot pockets, a lot of them have stopped playing at the moment. They burned out softly or hardly for one reason or another. Flying hot pockets, more specifically, had a little roleplay thing with Harkon where he said, "Yeah, you can tell them my character got killed by the loyal Amar, like they shot him."
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where, as Amarian players, they were getting a lot of stick, like in character, and I don't know, I presume out of character as well in terms of what are you doing? You signed a treaty with the Minotaur, like that's insane. Obviously, we've had a certain amount of that ourselves, roleplay wise, but with the Minotaur, it's a little more sort of flexible and fluid. And okay, you've gone crazy, but whatever, you do you. We'll try and deal with this situation in Flossiswin, and whatever you're doing, just do it over there.
So we enter this kind of state of turmoil, and where this all starts to cut back into the public, so it starts to leak back out again, is when we start to hear rumors that citadels are being attacked in the war zone, and not by players, but by NPCs.
Indeed, we start to see these diamond rat fleets. So, depending on the size of the citadel they're attacking, slightly smaller. So we had sort of 60 battleships and then support attacking our Astra houses. Initially, the one in Flossiswin being the sort of the hub of this thing, and that was House Sarum themselves, the people doing the invading. But a nice diamond fleet out in Flossiswin to reinforce our citadel. And unlike the other diamond rats that you see around the cluster, they were coming back for the timers. It wasn't the normal thing where it's sort of just on a random number generator, and you just have to get really unlucky for them to come back and hit the second or third timers. They were very much coming to hit the things repeatedly. With one of our Fortizars, a bigger fleet showed up, so maybe 100 battleships, and then support fleet um, came to reinforce that, and that actually happened on the night of a little arena tournament that we set up to celebrate our 15th birthday as Ushra'Khan, the oldest alliance in the game. So you have the situation where we're looking to get going to have our tournament, but a large fleet of 24th Amar, the NPC faction itself, has shown up to reinforce our Fortizar, and we have to choose between staying, trying to defend it, or going and having our birthday tournament. And we chose the tournament because, of course, we did. It was our 15th birthday. But that got a few sort of negative comments from people, certainly, in terms of, okay, it's great that you're doing this, but the timing is a little off here. Like, we had a lot of timers going off at that point, and we were trying to do things for our birthday as well, and we just had Eve London, which was fantastic, but, a lot was going on.
Hey, don't worry about it. It was just CCP trying to give you a birthday present.
Yeah, a nice little birthday push. There you go.
Just one shot at the time.
Yeah. I mean, as it turns out, we sort of developed some tactics for fighting off those fleets. It being a very specific encounter. You've got a large fleet attacking you at quite long ranges as well. Those battleships were hitting up to a couple of 100 kilometers with their lasers. But it is PvE, and we did have the option of docking up. So even once CCP removed our ability to tether, which again is nice, is a fantastic sort of poke towards the fact that Citadels broke something of the mechanics of faction warfare in terms of your ability to dock up is no longer dependent on whether you own the system or not. And the kicking over castles patch, taking away the ability to tether, is an interesting one. I like it as a sort of short-term, well, yeah, that makes a definite effect, and you have to be very aware of the mechanics in this. Again, the timing, when we're heavily under attack already, and had, but a short amount of time later, lost our citadel in local once it was destroyed, as the House Sarum rats came back for the final timer on our Astra house, and were joined by a third party, or a few third-party groups in terms of pirates and people who came for the kill, because they know we'd be putting battleships out to fight those rats. And in terms of the time frames around here, so the 12th of December is when that particular fight happened. So the House Sarum rats come back for the final time on our Astra House in Flossiswin. The pirates then come in and destroy the Astra House whilst being shot. Some of the Amar loyalists themselves were being shot by the Amar rats because they were mostly just shooting whatever was there. Um, but that same day, you have a news article come out, and within that, we have Valkyrie General Kanth Filmer, who is a hardy old Mimitar general who's very much beloved by a lot of the roleplay community on the Mimitar side. Filmer hails efforts of Mimitar militia, but urges swift recapture of Flossiswin system. Right? So at this point, we've recaptured a lot of the systems around Flossiswin. And one of the interesting things about that was that CCP Delegate Zero sort of worked in like supply lines to this. So say he was saying there's a direct supply line. The Amara own all of these systems between Flossiswin and their space, like their supply line. So they're really easily resupplying Flossiswin. We then took those systems around it to stop that happening. Whereupon he was like, right, okay, yeah. So they're still able to bring stuff in, but it's a lot more difficult for them now. But you need to take the system. And it's this thing of the actual factional flow mechanics of owning the system are not having an impact. That meaning something. Like this invasion is going to continue happening until you retake the system.
So it's basically that him. So it's almost like they're live experimenting with ways they can change up the system.
Or at least working within the mechanics they have at their disposal to make things a bit more interesting right now. Like, okay, so the Amal aren't actually fighting you right now. Here's several large fleets of NPC rat.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
So normally when people think about rats in EVE Online, they generally do not think of them as particularly powerful, and whilst some people in my audience might be familiar with how powerful diamond rats are, I expect it's going to be the vast minority. So can you give us some idea of what separates these diamond rats from regular ones?
Certainly. I mean, the diamond rats are interesting ones. You may have seen the diamond rats mainly around belts and stations. They sort of warp in and out, seem fairly benign. They do seem to work off standings somewhat. So if you have bad standings, they will attack you. And they don't work on the same AI as a lot of the rats you find in missions, especially. Or say if you're ratting in Nullsec, though that AI is fairly old at this point. This is a new AI which has a lot of player learning built in. So they have logi, and if you target their logi, that logi will warp away and warp back again if you haven't scrambled it. Their whole fleet, if there's something which the AI feels is a greater threat, they will warp out and warp back in again and target that. There's a lot of player behavior there built in, which makes sense in terms of this is how EVE fleets work. This is how this NPC fleet would sort of react, given how the mechanics of the game work. So when you have a fleet of 100 battleships with a full support wing of 30 logistics cruisers, that's a problem. Like, even for, a medium-sized group in LowSec.
Because those ships have relatively similar stats to player ships, they're not going to be quite as optimally organised in fleet doctrine and working in quite the same level of coordination, but they are still going to shoot things and hurt a lot when they hit.
Absolutely. And in LowSec and in NullSec, you get Soitios for I think it's just the Blood Raiders and the Goristas, if I'm not mistaken, that spawn and will put Diamond Rat fleets out in local and they will hit the structures. In terms of whether they then come back for any timers, that more or less depends if they have a fleet out at that point looking to fight structures. They'll fight it if they can. But that's a situation where I think a lot more of the Nullsec dwellers will have encountered this maybe when you get the Diamond Rats coming in. And obviously that's how you get some of the blueprints for, say, the Blood Raider faction capitals. And at this point, I have to say, we need Thukka faction capitals. The Mimitar are the only faction that don't have any faction capitals in terms of, a reskinned pirate capital of their hulls. I think the Thukka would be a good candidate for this.
Okay, so I have to just ask, first of all, is what's your experience been like actually fighting these fleets then? Has it actually been kind of fun, or has there been like role-playing local? What's been really keeping you engaged with this?
I mean, in terms of fighting the fleets the it can be somewhat frustrating when, for instance, when we were fighting for our Astra House's hull timer, so the final timer on the structure, on our last structure in the system, the diamond rats were hitting us at 600 kilometers when we walked off to regroup, which is like, okay, this is a little bit not okay, but not just shooting us, but hitting us, damaging us at 600 kilometers. Um, in the main, on that fight, the sort of the first half of that fight, we were doing pretty well. It was pretty fun in terms of being an unconventional fight. So going out there in a fleet that can just dock up when it needs to, because you're fighting rats. You don't get a timer. You don't get locked out of the station. So we were grinding down all the battleships, maybe working some support when it seemed appropriate. But we were getting there, and that felt really good in terms of having made a doctrine to actually meet this threat. Now, as it happens, Eve, low sec happens, and other people came in to destroy the structure, but that was pretty good. And in terms of those fleets being there, so these were in, I think, 4 different systems we saw them in. One of the others being Lolm, where House Adi Shapur, which notably in terms of them dividing up these upper provinces and lower provinces, this is a different province. So we had a House Adi Shapur putting out a fleet into Lolm to reinforce one of my structures there. That was a little more interesting in terms of the supply line thing, because that was way behind their supply lines. Like, that was a long way away from any systems held by the Amar, so I wasn't too sure what to make of that. But the Diamond Rats are an interesting one. It can be grindy, especially if you've got a Blood Raider Soitio in your system and they're constantly reinforcing your structures. That can get very annoying if you can't deal with the Soitio, which takes some firepower to destroy. But I do feel like it's now an area of the game that with a little more support, a little more mechanics in there, could be really good. Especially with like faction warfare. Some of the mechanics in faction warfare are pretty old, so things like the eye hubs. Killing the rats in a faction warfare plex is very, very normal, and you generally just take a drone boat, so you don't even have to click anything. Your drones just defend you and kill the rat. Getting some more of this active PvE would be a very good thing. And in terms of the level 4 missions, like the cause of this all, at the root of it, there's a big divide between the people who come in to do the PvE, to come and make some LP and do the missions, and the people who want to fight in faction warfare and do the PvP, because it's a big draw. Like, I was never much of a PvPer before I joined faction warfare, because I'm a role player and I didn't really have any impetus to go and kill people. Like, why would I really care in character? Faction warfare gives you that. I care about this, that this is my team, these are my people, that's their team, their people. We might get on perfectly well down the pub at Eve Meet, but for now, we are fighting. And when I first joined faction warfare, there was a real feel of sort of solidarity against pirates. So we'd be in a situation where us and, say, Pi are having a fight in a plex. And a third party comes in, some pirates come in, and we would actually stop fighting each other for long enough to kill all the pirates in a sort of gentleman's agreement, and then go back to fighting each other, But without the mechanics there, without something being shaken up in faction warfare, it does feel like it's dying a slow and quiet death. I know there's been some more activity in the Galente Caldari warzone of late. I think the Galente have had a campaign to come back and start retaking things, alongside the elections, I'm assuming. But for a long time there, the Galente left. They went out to Galmelistan, and Templis Calcif on the Caldari side, more of a nullsec entity these days. It's not in a good shape.
It's to be fair, we've always seen alliances move out from faction warfare. That's been something that's a long-standing tradition. But what we normally saw is we saw more entities come in to replace those. We saw the ground level new swell of recruits into that area of the game, and I think that's more what you're seeing. That's more of the problem. But that is my outsider's perspective.
I mean, there's always been movement in and out, and sort of people wanting to do different things, and the difference is that this time around it does seem like there's not a lot coming back in to fill that void. A lot of the people who used to do that don't necessarily have the impetus to do it anymore.
Okay. Well, I don't want to do too deep of a dive into the problems of faction warfare because we're already 35 minutes into the interview.
No worries.
But what I wanted to do just at the end of this is ask you a little bit more about how people might be able to get into either faction warfare or role playing, because those are both things that I see asked a lot in my channel. And I wanted to ask you, how would someone who's curious about getting more into those areas of the game start to get involved?
I mean, faction warfare itself is a funny one. When they redid the starting missions, like the new player experience, at one point they had it sort of poke you towards faction warfare if you were interested in PvP, which was a very noble thing to do, but was something we sort of laughed at the time because it's like, why would you put people towards this sort of broken broken mechanic where they're not going to get any help? In terms of joining faction warfare, I mean, there are NPC faction warfare corps that you can join if you go to any of the stations that your faction's militia own. So, Tribal Liberation Force, the Amal 24th, reclaiming thing, Federation Navy. The you can join the NPC corp and you can go and you can duplexes. You can do do missions once you get enough standings. But like so many things, what you want to do is find a group. So there are still definitely groups out there who maybe not so much with the faction warfare now, but certainly in terms of the roleplay, there are still roleplay groups out there fighting for their factions. I mentioned Templis Calcif, who certainly started as a Caldari loyal roleplay group in the war zone. You've got a few different ones for the Galente, so Federation Uprising, and Villar Accord. It's always a difficult one. I mean, for us in Ushra'Khan, you have Voices UK as our sort of recruitment channel. And in terms of the role play itself, it's a deep, deep well. The lore of Eve, there is a lot there, and it can be very daunting. But there's always plenty of people sort of happy to talk about this stuff. You've got a few different channels where you can go to ask questions. So OOC, just the three letters OOC, or the Out of Character channel are some places where they may be out of character channels, but they're where you can go and you can ask these questions about roleplay issues. I myself have a channel, the Mimitar.ooc, so Mimitar Out of Character, which has specifically links to lore material for the Mimitar. Eve Source is sort of the Bible for Eve lore at this point, but it does disagree with several points, especially with the Mimitar. So it's a little bit of a sort of minefield there. But the main thing, especially with the Mimitar, is don't worry about the sort of existing lore. The Mimitar are very, very diverse. So almost anything that you could be role playing, other than being from the Starkminer tribe, which is something I've had to sort of correct people on before, because they were all gone up until a few years ago. Is most things roll with the Mimitar.
Yeah, generally I find that people are always happy to help. You've just got to be willing to understand that, there are rules there. There is a lot of long-standing law and there is a lot of wiggly details. And it's going to take time to kind of figure it all out and to really craft a character. You're not going to sit down day one and know everything and know every niche about your character. And you should be okay with that, and you should enjoy your character evolving. That's a big part of roleplay, at least for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took a good few years before I was sort of ready to start taking part in, say, public roleplay events, gatherings and stuff. But that was a situation where I was very happy to sort of build my character naturally. So things that happened to me while I was playing the game, places I ended up living, I then started writing into the backstory of my character.
Alright, well, before we wrap this up, do you have any final comments that you'd like to make to the audience?
Matar Invictus?
Are there any other things other than UK you'd like to shout out before we go?
I mean, Electus Matari, for sure. Electus Matari did some of the sort of heavy footwork, retaking Flossiswin. We had a sort of lightning raid over the last weekend to retake the system, but they certainly stepped in nicely to deploy some capitals and retake the iHub. There's been a few people asking, sort of, who are this Electus Matari, like new faction warfare group? which is a little incorrect. Electus Matari are an old school Minotaur roleplay group who are not tied to the Warzone. They are a roleplay group who are anti-pirate specifically, so will be involved in anti-pirate stuff within Minotaur HiSec. They were involved in the fight in Heck recently, the rather large Hogs bash which occurred and got in the news.
Alright, well, thank you so much for making the time to come and talk to me today. I hope that things remain as interesting as they have been, and there's an excuse for us to talk again sometime soon.
Thank you, sir. Ciao for now.
A special thanks, as always, go out to our Crassuses, Pinche Infidel from Old School, Brood from Triumvirate, and Zolka Lando, as well as to our other $5 patrons in Dustin Freighter, Crazy Daisy, Zar, Olav Olden, Kem, Raphael, Big Bada Boom, Dunk Dinkle, and the Ashfell Federation. If you want to support the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon and PayPal links in the description below, or just share the channel with other people who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.